So a couple weeks ago, we started to look at the Psalms as an opportunity to really pray through Scripture, to pray the Psalms, which we can do. I mean, if you've never done that personally and just prayed the Psalms, read them as prayers to God, I'd encourage you to do so. But we're going to look at some of them, and we're bouncing around to them. But last week we had the great opportunity to have our youth share about our mission trip and what they did in Oklahoma and this summer. And so really grateful that they came and shared all the hard work that they did and the ways God used them and worked in them a couple weeks ago when they spent a week with the Osage Nation. But we're looking at the Psalms, and today we're going to look at one as an opportunity to really read and pray in our fears. Thinking about the kinds of fears that we have, so there's so many different ones, and the kids were sharing some of theirs. When I was a kid, my grandparents live in Wichita, and there was apparently at some point some report that somebody had gotten shot just for looking at somebody funny when they were on the road somewhere. And so my grandma got this in her head, and so anytime you were going to drive through Wichita, and especially when my cousin was going to drive across town to his house, she would end your conversation with, "Don't look at anybody." So anytime you were going to leave, it's become a big joke in my family. Anytime we leave, it's, bye, it was nice seeing you, we'll see you next time, love you, don't look at anybody. And it's because that fear of, we heard that if you look funny at somebody, they might shoot you, which I think might have been a little overblown, but I don't know. I wasn't there. Well, it made me think of that as I read this story about this woman. She was in Arkansas, and she was sitting in her car in a parking lot when she heard a loud bang and felt a sharp pain on the back of her head. So she reached back and grabbed on. As somebody was coming by, they saw her there and said, "Are you okay?" And her response was, "I've been shot in the head and I'm holding my brains in." She could feel it. She was sitting there holding it in the parking lot. Now, in reality, if you've ever made Pillsbury biscuits or crescent rolls, they come in this little tube. You know this tube? This is actually one of my mom's greatest fears. She refuses to open these tubes because the shock of it popping open, she can't handle. So she makes us do it whenever we're in town. And then she tells us not to look at anybody when we leave. But anyway, this lady's sitting in her car and it's hot, and one of those tubes popped open, shot biscuit at her, hit her in the back of the head, and she reached up and grabbed it and thought, "It's my brain coming out of the back of my head." The things we think about when we're afraid, right? A little crazy, but she was okay. Now, when I was a kid, I was fairly scared of things, and it really culminated in my bedroom when I was in 4th grade. We moved to a new house. I'd always shared a room with my brother my whole life. And so for the first time we moved to this new town, we had this bigger house, and for the first time I got my own room. And I was excited. When we went and checked it out, I picked the room, and I'm like, I want this one. It's right at the top of the stairs. It's got a big closet. It's a big room. I love it. This is going to be awesome. What I didn't do was really look in depth into the closet when I checked it out. So I'm 10 years old. And the problem is, it had a nice walk-in closet, but if you turned, you saw stairs to the attic. And there was just a cutout in the roof for the attic, or in the ceiling of that. And then there was a couple inches thick piece of foam that covered that hole. What that meant was, on a windy day, you open the door to the closet, and you would see it just suck that styrofoam up, as if someone with an axe was lifting this and was getting ready to come down to murder me in my sleep. And so I was terrified of my room. I would not sleep in my bedroom. For about the first year we lived in that house, I would find ways not to go to bed and wait till my older brother's bedtime and go sleep in his room with him. I just refused to sleep in my room. for quite some time because I was afraid. But what I remember was, as I would lay in my bed trying to get to sleep, trying not to think of what was in my closet, I would pray. And I would pray, and I would pray, and I would pray, and then I would wake up the next morning. You know, and it was there was that little bit of security in knowing that God at least was listening. He may or may not save me from the closet, but he was at least listening. And I was able to sometimes make it work. We're afraid of lots of things. Sometimes they're irrational, like my closet when I was a kid. Sometimes they're irrational now. I mean, we have some irrational fears as adults still. If you come into this building at night and no one else is here, let me tell you about irrational fears. You hear every noise. Churches are creepy at night when nobody's in there. And so those kinds of things come out. We have some irrational fears. Sometimes we have those, I mean, it's the spiders, the snakes, the things that I may not have ever even experienced one up close, but just the idea of it scares me to death, and I don't want to go near it. And then we have rational fears. I mean, we have the real fears, the fears of somebody getting sick or somebody in my family getting hurt, the fear that something could happen. Spent my whole life in the Midwest, and I was never afraid when a tornado warning siren went off until Katie and I were in a tornado. And now that's like a real thing, that when that goes off, if it's not the top of the hour, I'm a little concerned. And there's some fear there because we've experienced the reality of what can happen. So the question, I guess, today is, do we have a reason to fear? We do live in a scary world. As Megan read for us, in this world, you will have trouble. And when we, watch the news, there is much to fear. There's violence, there's illness. So what do we do with it? Honestly, I go back to my 10-year-old self praying in my bed, trying to go to sleep. And it reminds me what we do with it. And it goes back to the Psalms. As I said, praying the Psalms can be a great thing. So we're going to look today at Psalm 27. It's a very popular psalm to read. It's one that as we read it, you're going to recognize song lyrics from old hymns and new songs alike that come out of Psalm 27. But for me, it is a place that we can go and we can pray this prayer as David did, reminding ourselves of who is in control and what we should be afraid of. Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advanced against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above my enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You've been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. Can't you imagine David in one of those moments where things are not going well for him, sitting and hiding and saying these words, kind of as a half prayer to God and as a half reminder to himself of how things are really going to be. I imagine if I would have known this well enough, if I'd have memorized this as a kid, and I'd have been able to lay in my bed saying, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" How much stronger I would have felt in those moments. And also, I think I probably could have prayed at the same time, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me," because they made me go to bed in that room every night. But at least I could have called out to the Lord, who will not leave me in those moments. This Psalm 27 reminds us that the power is in God, not in whoever we fear or are against. The enemies that come after me, they're going to stumble and fall because they have no power over the power of my God. But this depends completely on our perspective. This kind of fearlessness, this kind of trusting God in the midst of our fears comes when we have the right perspective, when we're paying attention to the right things. So one of the stories in the Gospels of Jesus and his ministry and his disciples. It's a pretty popular one. The disciples go off on a boat. Jesus stays behind, and then all of a sudden they see something out on the water making his way towards them, right? It's Jesus. He's walking on the water. One of the many miracles, one of the many ways he shows his power over nature. He's walking out on the water, and they're freaking out because they think he's a ghost until they realize that they think it's, he says, "Don't be afraid, it's me." So Peter responds by saying, "If it's really you, let me come out and walk to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Okay, come on." I mean, it's so cool because Peter, we kind of see some of his worst attributes a lot of times. This is one where nobody else trusted Jesus enough to get out of the boat and get on the water. Peter does, and he steps out onto the water, and he's looking at Jesus, and he is going. He is walking on water. He's doing something nobody has ever done before, and he's doing it with faith in the one that has power over the water. Until he lets the things around him creep in, right? He's looking at Jesus, he's walking on water, everything's going fine until the wind and the waves, the distractions and the fears around him start to creep in. Because imagine that fear. I'm not supposed to be up here. This is not how this is supposed to work. This can't keep happening. And you start seeing the waves, you start seeing the things that aren't right, and instead of keeping his focus on Christ, his focus begins to go on the things that he's afraid of, and in he goes. Until Jesus comes and pulls him out. What Psalm 27 does is it restores our focus. When we get caught up in all the fears and all the things, what could happen to me? I'm so afraid to do anything because I could get in a car accident if I go anywhere. I could get hurt if I do anything. My kids are in trouble. Everything's going wrong. I can get caught up and distracted by all of these fears. And Psalm 27 sets our gaze back at God. Reminds us that the Lord is my light and my salvation. Of whom shall I fear? I read this story about a Native American tribe that did this unique practice for their young. When boys would turn 13, they would take them and they would take them out into the woods, and they would be required to spend the night on their own taking care of themselves. So they would blindfold them, take them out into the middle of a dense forest, and leave them there. So imagine being a 13-year-old boy out there in the middle of the woods all night. Every twig you hear snap, you're sure is something coming to get you. Every animal howl, you imagine a wolf leaping out of the darkness. Every time the wind blows, you wonder what sinister thing is coming to get you. I can't imagine being out there completely alone. But eventually, the sun starts to come up, and the light starts to creep its way into the forest. And what they would find as they saw flowers and trees, they'd see the outline of the path that led them there, until they noticed the figure standing just a few feet away. It was their dad with a bow and some arrows, diligently watching over his son, to make sure nothing could actually happen to him in the middle of the night. All night, the fear that I'm alone, I'm on my own, I don't have anyone to protect me, was just because they couldn't see that Dad was no further than a few feet away, in order to make sure that they were okay. Psalm 27 reminds us that that is where we are. We are that kid who thinks they're alone in the woods when Dad is right there, strong and ready to protect us. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advanced against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. We are invited to pray this prayer, to say these words, to remember, to set our focus on God so that we can remember that it is He who has power over life and death, over everything that makes us afraid. And when we do that, we don't have to be scared. That closet isn't so scary anymore. The darkness isn't something we have to worry about. That fear of illness or accident or death or whatever it is does not have to take us down, because God is the one who has power and who has promised to be faithful to us. And that's good news.